Welcome to episode 198 of Trek Live. In this week's episode, we're going to be putting our writer's cap on and tackling a Daxless Season 7 of Deep Space Nine. But before we get into that, Bill, how you doing this morning?
Doing great. Looking forward to getting into this. We've been talking about it for a little while. I think we kind of teased it when we talked about Ezri Dax, and I think we've touched on it whenever we talked about Season 7 of DS9. And should be interesting to really unpack it and think about what could have been or what might have been. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I think it's a perfect time to do this. Both Bill and I have had some time away from it, but we've also watched it recently, so I think it's a good time to be able to tackle a topic like this. I know it is. I feel like it's everybody has done something like this with a character introduction, maybe a mid-season or towards the tail end like this one. Which we've had characters like this come into shows before, but not many, I don't think, for maybe just one season, besides maybe Pulaski. But she was in the earlier, like the front half of a series, as opposed to which is different because I feel like the character is a little bit more established. It makes it tough, but
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique animal. I think it lends itself to a really easy sort of alternative universe of what might have looked different, what the fallout of just that one single different choice might have made on a single season. And we'll get into that, and definitely looking forward to it. But before we do, I'll do a quick rewatch recap, and then I'm going to look for your 5 favorite episodes of Lower Decks Season 1, which is the survey of the week.
That was coming.
Yeah. I started, well, actually, since we did this last, I finished Voyager, which is a whole thing. I watched, I'm not even sure I remember exactly where I stopped the last time we did this. But like during the week, I know I watched things like Friendship One, Natural Law, Homestead, through the end, like that last little batch of episodes. And it's, I think it's always frustrating. We've touched on this a few times because we've hit Voyager at various points in rewatches while we've been doing Trek Live. But it's hard to separate the desire to see Voyager get home and see some of the fallout of the 7 years in the Delta Quadrant and where characters might end up, and having some pretty routine episodes there at the end instead of having that taste at the end of the show can be a little frustrating at times for me. But if I remove myself from that expectation and that wish, a lot of those episodes are pretty strong. I really like Homestead. I think that's a really nice send off for Neelix. I don't love some of the guest performances in that episode with the Talaxian family, and I think some of those performances aren't highlights, but I think Ethan Phillips is great, and I really do love his last scene on the ship with saying goodbye to Tuvok and the rest of the crew. Like the Tuvok dance is really, really nice. And we've touched on Endgame a lot, I think, over the years on individual topics and talking about Voyager. But there's things in it that I really do enjoy. I've always been a big proponent for Kate Mulgrew's performance in it, playing the dueling Janeways, Captain and Admiral. I think they're both really, really good performances in their own rights. And there's some big cinematic stuff with the Borg and exciting Star Trek action stuff in there. A lot of the frustration comes again from the lack of what happened. So much of Voyager's about that journey home, and and there's so many hanging threads with characters being, not because of the fact that they're all kind of thrown together and they're all outcasts, and they're not just Starfleet officers coming home, like they're Maquis outlaws and the holographic program that was never really intended to be what he becomes, and Seven of Nine is a whole thing. Like there's a strong desire on I think a lot of people's parts, myself included, to see what happens. Unfortunately, one of the things that's different this time around is some of these characters we kind of do know now because of the new stuff. Seven of Nine, we know what happened to her, like what her next chapter sort of looks like years down the road, and we're starting to learn a little bit more about a few other characters because of other stuff that's on now. So the new stuff's really kind of maybe even changing how I look at that end of Voyager. Yeah. And I also started Enterprise, which is a whole other thing.
Yeah, I was just gonna try to get to that.
Yeah. I've been going pretty quick these last few weeks. Broken Bow through Breaking the Ice, or Civilization, I think was the last one I watched last night.
Cruising.
Cruising. I watched the first handful of Enterprise episodes. Love the Andorian incident. A lot of those early episodes, I think, really do stay true to the premise of the show with the sort of right stuff vibe of early exploration. I really think they were on point in the early days of the first season, which is what I kind of just got through. And Broken Bow is a good pilot, for sure. So more to come there with Enterprise as I get into that, and look forward to talking about that. Lower Decks Season 1. Looking for a top 5.
Top 5 will start with Veritas.
Okay.
And then we'll jump down to Envoys.
Okay.
Moist Vessel.
Yep.
No Small Parts to Crisis Point 1.
Okay. I think we have the same top 5 list. We do have the same top 5 list, actually.
Yeah, just real quick on the season 1 of Lower Decks. That back half is pretty solid. That last 4 or 5 episodes, pretty solid run, which is pretty cool to see on a season 1, which we've talked about before. But good stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's another one, kind of like last week with Picard. It's interesting to see how the 10 episode seasons kind of shake out, with the vote distributions being so much tighter than like a 26 or a 24 or 22 episode season. Even the Discovery seasons of 15, 14 that I did, this is so much more kind of everything kind of jam-packed together. I can say that we have 3, at this point at least, pretty heavy front runners that are pretty well out ahead, and then a very tight group beyond those 3.
Yeah.
It's pretty, a big chunk of the rest of the season within a handful of votes. Like, there was a big flood of ballots coming in. It could totally shake up, what that number 4, number 5 would be. So interesting to see. Tuesday night on Twitter, you'll see me share that final chart with what finishes where, and then a poll will come out with the top 4 and which is your favorite of the 4. And should be interesting. Next week will be next week is Discovery Season 3.
Nice.
Getting into the really recent stuff.
Yeah.
At this point. And then Lower Decks Season 2 after that. And then it's kind of a pause until Discovery Season 4 is done. So, getting to the end of this, at least weekly project. We're going to get to a point where it goes on pause until season ends.
Nice. And then we'll be back. Yeah. Season 4 of Discovery. And Prodigy, I'm guessing. Maybe.
Down the road. Yeah, I think I'm going to wait until the 19, 20 episodes are done on that. So who knows when that'll be. I think because of there's 10 episodes, but there's a 2-parter at the end, and then there's the first episode's a kind of a 1-2 deal.
Mid-season break. So
it's pretty condensed, and I think asking for a top 5 out of that's going to be really
tough.
Tough to parse. Yeah. So I think I'm going to let the full 20 episodes play out. Jeff is in the chat and shared he went with Second Contact pilot. Envoy is Cupid's Iron Arrow, Crisis Point, and their small parts. Awesome. I got your votes, Jeff. They are in the mix. And thank you as always for taking part.
Yeah.
Always appreciate it. So I think we should get into topic of the week. We've done a couple of these
Let's
over
do
the
it.
years. I think
Yeah.
this is like the third or fourth one where we'll put our writers' room hats on, kind of put ourselves in the shoes of a creative on the show, and maybe give ourselves like an alternate route or a task to create like something new. We did Enterprise season 5. What would that look like? We've done. What else have we done? Did we do Voyager after they got home? I think.
Yeah, I think so. Season 8 or something like that.
Yeah, we've done things like that.
And Enterprise, maybe.
Yeah, we did Enterprise for sure. So there's a couple of these floating around in our archives, in our backlog. If you're watching this and this is something that you enjoy, conversations like this, there's a few more to dig into that are similar. But I think, like we talked about at the very beginning, this is a really natural, easy season to kind of pick apart and maybe make one change and think about what that would do. So we're gonna think about season 7 without an Ezri Dax inclusion. We're gonna presume that Jadzia is gone, and that's that. At the end of season 6, there is no new host. We're not going to change anything in season 6, right? Cisco's gone back to Earth.
I think we should. I think the Dax symbiont lives on. I'm not.
Mm-hmm. Oh sure, yeah.
I'm not trying to write off the Dax symbiont, but I think that it goes back to
Trill.
Trill and it's just but yeah, Bill, just thinking about it, taking that one Dax Jenga piece out of the whole structure of the show, if you think about it, the season really is so centered around her. Like it's she helps bring Cisco back to the station. They find out, Worf and her find out that this alliance that the Dominion join with the Breen. Like this, she's such a pivotal. It's gonna be definitely tough to be able to come up with something. But yeah, it's just I guess to start off with, she's so intertwined with a bunch of the characters and the storylines of this season. It's really, I think we're really starting from scratch here.
Yeah, it's really, especially with Deep Space Nine, with so many characters. Some characters, if you pluck them out of the season, they're all integral, heavily involved with the stories of the shows, of the episodes, especially holistically. If you look at a whole season, they all make a big impact for sure. But in season 7, Ezri Dax, the way it happened, the season that exists, it is really a major influencer. She's got major interactions with Cisco, obviously, with Worf, major impact on the Worf character, major impact on the Bashir character, Garrick, Nog. Like there are major things that happen along the way throughout the season that involve Ezri, and it's her herself. It's having a counselor on board unlocks a lot of storylines that loom large in this season. So it's not a minor piece of the puzzle you're plucking out. It's a pretty foundational pillar. So it's a big deal. I mean, it would to be fair, it would change the entire identity of the season. I think we got a long list of episodes that can't exist without Ezri. Field of Fire, Prodigal Daughter, After Image. Like there are big chunks of the season that just don't work. So they're kind of scrapped. And while I'm not necessarily interested in like replacing all of those episodes with brand new ideas, I don't know we could do that in an hour.
It might take a little bit longer than
that's
that.
a long thing. Yeah. But as a whole, as like an arc, how does Cisco find his way back to the station if it's not? I mean, he's still kind of on his own mission and has his own journey that Ezri being along for the ride for is helpful to Cisco. I think it's reassuring to him. It's like a one piece of life kind of being restored. Having Dax back in the fold maybe helps motivate him to get up and go look for that orb and unlock the mystery of his mother and all that stuff. But it does kind of inherently change his trajectory. I think he's home because of Dax. So losing Dax, I think. Uh, I guess when we think about the Cisco dynamic, like how do we
I was
maybe see
thinking
that?
that it just make it like a father and son type of deal, and I think Cisco maybe starts to realize that he might not, he might, go into the temple and then do what he's gonna do, kind of at the end of the season, like we see. But I think it would be interesting to be able to have Cisco. All right, Jake, you tell the story. You're this writer. You're this. Help me decipher this story and how it's gonna be, and maybe make it like a father son thing. At least to be able maybe to get back. I'm not sure how involved Cisco is involved with the war. Because if you go the the prophets kind of in that story kind of bring him back to the station. But then it gets tough. Like, how do we solve this war? Do we get Kira back on involved with Cardassians earlier? Does Garrick help with that? Do we bring Bashir in with Section 31? They're trying to probably get their hands in it too. But yeah, it's tough to get Cisco back because he's lost his way. Like it's at the end of season 6, it's so demoralizing. He loses one of his best friends, and there's a lot going on.
I think your instinct to have it really pivot on his relationship with Jake is really good, and I think that's the right thing, especially given that we know it's season 7, it's the end of the show, and that's so core. We talked about this when you recapped season 7 and some of your mixed feelings about some of the ways that they wrapped that. That relationship, and I think to start season 7 and to have Cisco kind of be pulled back to life by his relationship with his son, and maybe have Jake be the one that can, get through to him that, there's a bigger picture here, and have Cisco do it for him, like to find it within himself to, want to do these things and to get back to the struggle, so to speak, for Jake. In whatever, we can develop that over a long period of time.
Yeah, because
really talk about how story-wise that would work. But I think that's a good instinct, because that's so core to the identity of Cisco's character. And if this is the last season,
and to Jake's,
to kind of pull it back that way, and to Jake's, those two characters are
like it's
right.
So I think that makes sense to be able to get that dynamic somehow back.
Mm-hmm. Put it back in the forefront. Yeah. I think that would have been a good mechanism to allow Cisco's journey back to have some momentum. I think the way that it's written now, it's really Ezri's arrival that kind of jolts him loose, and I think having a breakthrough with Jake is probably the good alternate route if we're not going to do the Ezri thing. What about with Worf? Obviously, Worf's journey at the beginning of the season is he's struggling with the fact that Jadzia didn't die in battle, like that she didn't die like a good Klingon death that brings honor to her name and guarantees her path to Sto-Vo. He's got his Klingon tradition really driving his grief. It's not so much that she's gone; it's the way in which she's gone. And he's driven to, he wants to win a battle in her name. He wants to do something bold and courageous and over the top to ensure her path to the afterlife. So I think the way that it's kind of handled in season 7, in those first couple of episodes, unpacking that, and then doing it in the second episode, in Shadows and Symbols, he goes off on this mission with Martok and O'Brien and Bashir and Quark are all there, and he does it. He wins. He has this big battle with the Klingons, and successful, and feels like he's finally done it. and then
Yeah.
she arrives on the station and it unpacks all of that. Like she's not really
Just
dead. Now what does this
unravels it.
mean?
Yeah, yeah,
With all that, yeah.
yeah.
If you're not going to go down that road, does it make sense to like extend that
I think
issue
it
for
does.
Worf?
I think it does because from the very beginning, when we see him on the Enterprise, he's so focused on just battle and war,
Yeah.
and I think that he reverts to that kind of true Klingon kind of mentality, and give him a few missions, a few arcs, but make him have to realize that the answer is not always shoot first and ask questions later, because I think it would be interesting to set him up to finally be this diplomat, say, hey, this is maybe not the route, and maybe go that route. I think would be interesting because he would be a Klingon, and it's always about it's a good day to die and battle and things like that, and I think it would be interesting to put a spin on. Have him interact with the Klingon High Council and say, hey, I'm a proponent for peace now, and but also, if it need be, obviously he's going to be able to throw it out in battle, but I think just take that character, just see that arc from season 1 of The Next Generation to kind of full circle to where this battle and this war has taken so much from him. Obviously his wife, kind of technically. If there's anything I might change about season 6, we talked about this at the top of the show. We can kill Dax, that's fine. Jadzia Dax, but maybe do it in a different way. Or maybe have, I don't know, Worf track down and kill him, and kill Dukat.
Yeah, the temptation's really there to want to retro the way that Dax meets her demise, but I think like it's this mixed thing, like having her go on that mission, go to that battle, and die on the Defiant, on the bridge of the Defiant, in like a blaze of glory, like in the midst of that battle, takes away that emptiness that Worf feels.
Yeah,
like the reason that Worf feels that would kind of relieve Worf of the dramatic goods as far as dealing with the death of Dax. Like I think his Klingon self would handle that pretty well. Like I mean, I think he's upset, but if his wife dies on the field of battle in a meaningful defeat of the Dominion, he's going to process that a lot easier than getting killed on the station in like a meaningless accident.
True.
So we can come up with. I think it's tempting to want to go back and retrofit that a little bit and maybe have it not be such a wacky accident involving Dukat. But I think it's important for it to be meaningless for Worf's benefit, to have it not be a blaze of glory death. That might impact Sisko and her other friends on the station, the rest of the cast. But from Worf's perspective, which I think is probably my favorite way to do this, to I think a lot of the stuff you just said about even using it as a way to harken back to Worf in the very beginning of TNG, where he's so eager for battle and wants those opportunities to be a warrior. That like those things can really get kind of called back, and I kind of envision this if you play out what he wants to do in Shadows and Symbols throughout the season, maybe you don't telegraph it so early, and he wants to take chances and risks, and he's making reckless decisions in episodes along the way. He's volunteering for missions that are super dangerous. He's pushing for, really chancy, reckless things. And it's a slower role to unpack why he's doing this. And it's not just grief. It's not just that he's upset. It's he wants to deliver Dax to the afterlife, and it's very core to his character. It's true to his character that this is something that he would do, and it's not just that he's unhinged. That there's calculation to what he's doing. To kind of slowly unroll that, I think would be interesting. As again, if you look at it through the lens of this is the end of Deep Space Nine, and the end of that character, on a weekly basis, and he's uniquely a character that goes back a whole nother show and is like 10, 11 seasons of content. That is an appealing thing to explore, to really get into his psyche, and
unique opportunity.
That's true to his identity. I think that's a cool thing. And he has these open opportunities too, because of his relationship with Martok. He kind of somewhat serves as Martok's first officer at times. Like they go off on their Klingon missions, he gets clearance to go fairly often. You know, you can foresee in some of these lost opportunities. Like we kind of just said, if you're taking episodes out of the equation because they're Ezri based, because we don't have Ezri, maybe there's opportunities to do like Shadows of the Empire or Shadows of the Empire, Soldiers of the Empire sort of episodes. Like maybe there's an episode opportunity there for a mission on a Klingon ship, on the Rataran with Martok, and he's pushing even too far for Martok. Like they're off on this thing, and he's freaking Martok,
who is the Klingon,
like, recklessness, and going over the top, and wanting to do crazy things, and maybe Martok's the one who kind of gets through to him and gets those answers, and realizes what he's doing and why. I think that would be a cool, way to unpack Worf's character a little bit. And
I think so, because you could play with like PTSD. You could have Worf hallucinate and all these things because of the damage of the war. I think would be cool. I think for me, as far as like the war front goes, I think there should be two different types of fronts, where I feel like we've got this loud type of strategy trying to win the war through Worf, but I think there should also be like a quiet, really secretive type of avenue that we could do with like Kira or some of the other characters. I think it would be fun to have that yin and yang, where it's like, we get those battle scenes here and there, but we also get these very complicated types of episodes where we get to see Kira in action. I think during the series, there is definitely some of those like little bits of her actually being a freedom fighter, but this is again being able to come full circle, which that's what I really love about the true season 7, is we do get to see that full circle between these two species being able to reconcile a little bit. I don't know if it's going to be just sunshine and rainbows right away, but seeing and having Kira to be ordered to go, that's just I think would be fun too, to have that yin and yang type of front on the war.
I love that too. I think that would be having the extra time to play with those things, and maybe kickstart those processes and get the ball rolling toward those things happening more quickly, would be loosened up by not having the need to catch Ezri up to the ensemble, which I think is what ended up happening. Like I think by introducing Ezri in, it does inject a lot of drama into the season because of the way it impacts these different characters and the confusing way, like the confusing process that people have to go through because of her presence. But on top of that, and on top of just capitalizing on those dramatic opportunities, it's about getting her to the point where she is on equal footing with the rest of this ensemble that's so well developed and has so much meat on the bones. Like I think there's a lot of pressure to make sure that at the end of this season, at the end of the show, that Ezri feels like one of the gang. That she feels like she's got some history and some things that are unique to her, so that the emotional impact on brought on by her character's resolutions and stuff feel as earned as some of the other characters do. So removing the need to do that, I think, would allow things like that, those opportunities with Kira to maybe start sooner, or at least start hinting towards some of those things. I also think it would have, there's a lot of hinting of the effect of the war on like the psychological side of things, the trauma, in the Pale Moonlight, you get little moments where they're standing around waiting for the next casualty list to be posted, and you see that process.
That's really good.
unfold. Yeah, there's good stuff already in the show with dealing with the war, but I do think that there was an opportunity to, even though because of what we just talked about, that if you're going to have the war stuff play out a certain way, you need Dax to not die as like a war casualty, but having it be a character that's so tied to us and so ingrained in the ensemble get lost in this conflict does offer an opportunity to really personalize the impact of the war and not have it be just the, oh my god, the Alpha Quadrant is at stake and all the big global or universe impacting big picture stuff, to really put a pin on characters who have close ties to Dax, like Kira, like Quark. Give them things to process, losing a friend, like a really close friend, as a sort of side piece to seeing people deal with war the way we already do in the show.
Not just like, because in the actual season, like they just like the Dax comes on and then it's like Julian and they're just like licking their chops to be like, oh, maybe we should try to, it's just right.
Yeah, it's kind of, some of the characters, not Worf, but some of the characters look at it like a reset button, which ironically, like, that's the thing that people knock Voyager for. They use the reset button all the time, and they stick DS9 up on a pedestal that they didn't do that. Well, they kind of did here. Like, they did allow for a bunch of these characters to kind of revert back to, okay, maybe she's not really dead. Like, it's a different vibe, but it kind of, in the way that bringing Spock back, like Star Trek's done this many, many times. The characters are never really dead. Shax and Lower Decks even, like that's like an
Star Trek
trope.
Yeah,
that's a Star Trek trope for sure.
Yeah.
But it does allow certain characters like Bashir to kind of almost be like, oh wow, she's back. Like that kind of feels like the way he responds to it, at least initially. He sees it as like an opportunity to reconnect and to kind of move forward without the same degree of grief dogging him. It numbs the loss, and I think maybe forcing these characters to go through this last season and the final push of the war, holding that grief actually heavily, like having it really impact their decisions, and have it fuel the drama in a way that maybe people do get lost, like the main characters can go. Having that kind of hang over the season might have brought some interesting opportunities. But it's also I get the it's a double-edged sword. Like, if you don't want the show to be a sort of brooding, miserable, like constantly dealing with grief and loss, like if you don't want the show's identity in that last season to be so
war heavy,
loaded with that, I can see the desire to not want to go down that road, like to not have to feel that pull every episode. Like it would create a more difficult tightrope to walk, I think, to go down the road we're talking about for those reasons.
I think there's some other stuff we could explore that would maybe be pull away from the war, but still feel a little bit connected. I think Quark, the Federation asked him to deal weapons, and I think there would be a cool humanity play to be like, okay, he was like, I think Quark has always been involved with that. I think it would be cool to get somehow get Bajor in the Federation. I think maybe they have done some great stuff with farming, and they're supplying food and rations to like refugees, and I think that would be cool to like have some like positives come out of this war, because we're kind of up a creek without a paddle, right? We're in this dark, heavy situation that we got ourselves in, and I think and the other thing is, to that point, Bill, what if we finished the war early than they did? We finish it mid-season, and it's more about
Picking up the pieces.
picking up the pieces on that latter half. Um, so yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
That'd be an interesting, kind of the same thing that we always have talked about with Voyager, but how different would that show feel if maybe there's a few episodes to go and they get home. The same thing with Deep Space Nine, maybe
Yeah.
giving some space for the characters to decide what their next steps are. And O'Brien's going back to Starfleet Academy or going to Starfleet Academy to teach, and Odo's going back to the Great Link, and obviously the Cisco thing happens in its own way. But like to give a little bit more of a runway for those things to happen, and to see the building blocks towards those things. I don't know about ending the war like at the halfway point, but I could definitely. I would have
last third
certainly
maybe.
like to have seen, like. To just have a little bit more leg room than the
last episode,
the last half of the last episode, to kind of push these characters into their new places, and to have montages that are sentimental and nice, to kind of drive home the end game, so to speak. So that certainly would have been interesting. I like your instinct though to things like the Bajor entering the Federation prospect would have a lot more room to maneuver, I think, with something like that. Post-war, I think that's an easier thing to kind of reopen, and to really start looking at again. There's a lot of opportunity there. I think I've always been really intrigued. They do a little bit of it. You get it in spurts here and there, and episodes like Shadows and Symbols. One of the cool things about those last couple seasons of Deep Space Nine is the Klingons feel like right there. Martok's a big character. He's like the attaché to Cisco and to that part of the fleet, and he's a very active presence on the station, right? As like the head dude for the Klingon part of the fleet.
Yeah.
And in season 7, you get a little bit of that with the Romulans, and there is that. There's, Admiral Kretak, I think, or whatever the name is. She's there, but I would have loved to have seen.
Yeah, within striking distance.
Yeah, that whole thing. Yeah, having that develop maybe a little more slowly, and have that be more of a thing. Maybe have that character develop a relationship with the character on the show somewhere along the way, kind of like Martok has with Worf. I mean, that's a more common Bond thing, but whether it's Kira developing a stronger rapport with the Romulan head of state on the station, and create some dramatic tension there, would have been cool. Like I said, we get a little bit there, and then we get a little bit more Romulan stuff, and like Inner Arma, the Section 31 episode, goes deep into the Tal Shiar and that side of the Romulan war effort.
Yeah.
But without the specter of the Ezri stuff hanging over, I think there are more minutes in the season that you can dedicate to things like that, and allow those things to take more of a forefront, because that's such a major pivot in the Star Trek universe. Really, is like bringing the Romulans into the fold and have them not be this sort of like North Korean, like isolationist empire off to the side that nobody knows really anything about beyond those borders, and it's kind of a restricted, protected by a neutral zone kind of a deal. Like bringing them in and having the people start forming relationships with them, and like that's an interesting thing that I don't know gets totally taken advantage of in the season.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great idea. Adding just layers to that kind of species that feels so, and maybe it's tough because it's kind of a hard balance to walk, because the secretiveness is almost the benefit of that species, and I don't want to take too much away from that, but it's also like I think it would be interesting to be able to get a few more layers out of them,
Yeah, and I think a character like Kira represents probably the best opportunity to get a window into Romulan culture and Romulan worldview. Because Kira's not, at least at this point, from the Federation world. If the Romulans are skeptical of the Federation and untrustworthy of the Federation and Starfleet. She's a free agent, sort of like that's a different organization and not a member or not tainted by the Federation. So I could see, you know, Romulan official sort of having maybe a little bit more of an ally in somebody like Kira, who's a high level officer in that on the station. Sort of represents another wing of that dynamic, not the Klingons who there's history with the Romulans, not the Federation who there's history with, but the Bajorans and the Bajoran militia and the sort of the home team, so to speak, for that that region of space. That would seem like a more comfortable zone for that character to develop a personal tie. And I would have liked to have seen that. Because Deep Space Nine offers that unique opportunity because it does sit in one place for the characters to kind of just sit and live. And that's like one of the things that I think that show brings to the table is we get to see a character like Maratak represent the Klingons in a way that's not just like, okay, we ran into the ship for an episode and off we go.
Has a figurehead.
Taste of a crisis. Yeah, right. There's an ongoingness to it and a casual life sort of taste to how they're existing on screen, and to interject a little taste of the Romulans there, I think would have been a real opportunity to move the ball forward with a pretty iconic part of the Star Trek universe. Yeah. Anything else?
What about Odo?
That we Odo with Dax. I don't know that it changes Odo too much.
I don't think so either. I was just thinking that. I kind of like what they do with the Federation not looking good for what they do to use Odo. Yes. I like that.
And I think that they can keep that intact. Like, I don't think Ezri or the status of Dax really...
No.
That's a part of the story, like that wing of season 7, Section 31 stuff, the founders, the stuff that's happening with the Dominion, and the Changeling, like all that. I feel like can mostly stay intact, because it's not as touched by
Dax at all.
The Dax story,
and
I think that's a good thing, and that's that's some of the better stuff I think in that season. I think that stuff works. I think that the Kira going to Cardassia and having to teach the Cardassians how to freedom fight and be guerrilla warriors, like that stuff's great. I wouldn't want to move to that. I wouldn't want to touch that. Maybe give it the, like you said, maybe a little bit of runway to start sooner and to lay tea leaves and build up to that. Maybe give it a little bit more time. But those on the merits, I think those storylines are good. Bashir with Section 31. The stuff with Nog, I mean, you do lose the counselor element, but I think without Ezri, but she's there and she's doing her best to pull him out, but she doesn't make a huge impact on that story.
Yeah, he's not sitting on a couch and talking about his feelings. No, you know, she's definitely there. She's definitely brokering to his family technically. Hey, this is, I mean, And maybe
I think some of those
we make Jake that his confidant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's ways we could do that.
Whether it's Jake or Rom or Lita, I think there are other characters that can kind of take a more active role in pulling him back away from Vic. That I think if Ezri is not there, I think he can manage it. But I think Ezri has some really nice scenes in that episode. And this is not to say, I mean, I like Nicole DeBoer. I think Ezri has some good things to do in that season.
Yeah.
I think there are things that work with the way that they handle the Worf character, the way it is. I think it gives the Bashir character some interesting things to play with and some interesting conflicts with Worf as well. Like there are things I don't want to misrepresent if this is the first time you've watched us talk about this season. I wouldn't want to come across like I'm anti-Ezri and I wish that she didn't exist. But this is it is interesting to think about what might have been, how it would have looked different without.
Yeah.
And Jimmy77 just said, very interesting discussion, and I'm glad they kept the Dax character. So that's certainly fair, and I think a lot of people, are ardent fans of Ezri and are glad the way that it played out. I'd be interested to sort of read the room on how people, where would that come down, like in a poll, like which of these paths is more appealing. Jeff says he'd be interested to see what the Discovery writers could have done with Ezri. Not to say that the DS9 writers weren't great, because they are the GOAT. Agreed. But fast forward 20 years and what could have been explored in greater detail with the serialization, like they're doing kind of with, especially the counselor side of things with Culber. Like there are definite sides to that job that I think Discovery definitely has done a nice job, especially this season, with exploring life as the ship's counselor on the show.
That's very true.
Never quite got unlocked with Troy or Ezri.
But
the real hard part of that job.
You think this would be the perfect, like, place for one of those, like, during wartime. I know, like, space travel and these like one-off missions definitely take a toll on a crew.
Yeah.
But I think especially in wartime, which they kind of do with Nog, like we talked about, and some of the other episodes and stuff. But I think you're right. But again, I don't know. Do we lean on another character to be that counselor? Because like we Bashir becomes such a proponent for humanity and for doing the right thing. Maybe do we bring him in? Do we do something with Jake where it's not really? He just has that such great relationship with a lot of the characters. Do we make him the? I don't know. It's tough.
The sort of voice of. Deep Space Nine is so reliant on like the friendships, the different pairings of the characters that I think, while we don't, up until season 7 when Ezra is introduced, we don't have a professional counselor where there's a professional person who specializes in mental health and working through these issues. But each character sort of has their own informal counselor through life, which I think is true in a lot of people's lives. That's people confide in certain people and work through issues with certain people, trusted friends. I think Deep Space Nine portrays that side of it really well. Again, it's not professional help. It's not somebody with a professional and educational background in those skill sets that they're confiding in. But that is certainly a real life thing, and I think Deep Space Nine portrays it well. That these different characters have, whether it's Sisko with Dax or O'Brien with Bashir and Bashir with O'Brien.
Well, no, we get it. Even with Ezri, like we still get O'Brien going to Worf with a bottle of blood wine, trying to work through things. Like so you're exactly right. We do have those pairings, but we also have that that group counselor mentality where it's just such a deep friendship that we'll go to someone's room with a bottle of booze and try to reconcile. I'm not saying that's the most healthiest way to to deal with trauma and things like that. There's definitely great professional help to be able to do that. But I just think you're totally right. I think that the show is already really set up to be able to have that support group.
I think the show's good at portraying that over the 7 years.
Yeah.
With and without Ezri in the picture.
Yeah.
Anything else coming up on an hour that we haven't touched on for?
I don't like the one thing that I would not include right here at the end. The Dukat Adami stuff. I cannot get on board with that. That's something that I would probably. That's on the.
Not your favorite.
That's on the floor. That's on the cutting room floor. I might take those characters in a couple different ways.
Well, the the Ducat character especially, I think, is another opportunity for like a writer's room kind of a deal. Like that's we kind of focused on the Ezri effect, but the Ducat character has such a journey and such a point where the change is so abundantly clear post Zial's death. Really, at the beginning of season 6, Ducat's character in this first few seasons is so different than what he is in that like back half of season 6 onward.
Goes off the rails.
It really kind of, I agree, and that seems like that's a major dividing line for how people feel about the way Deep Space Nine ends. The people who I think are less satisfied with the very, very end of the show, often in my experience, kind of point to that as something that they wish was done differently, and that falls a little flat for some.
Yeah,
I know some people it doesn't bother. It's certainly dynamic and different, but that's an interesting conversation to have too, to really dive into our feelings on that and how Ducat could have been maybe handled differently.
What would you do?
There's definitely a lot of points to consider. Because he's so tied. Like on one hand, it's interesting that he does kind of come back to like Bajoran culture, and he gets so tied into that because he is so like emotionally tied to Bajor and his place in Bajoran. Like he's obsessed with how the Bajorans see him, right? Mm-hmm. And that's like such a driving force in his life and the decisions that he makes. He wants to be respected and given credit for things he did for the Bajorans in his mind, and the fact that he gets drawn to that doesn't feel false.
He clearly has a savior complex. He's trying to save
very much so
things that he can't save. Like I think since like after his daughter's death, and I think that's what he's trying to reconcile with. But I don't hate that idea. I think you're right. I think he would be definitely fascinated in Bajoran culture, and he's so entangled in their history, really. But I do think I like that they keep that savior complex going, for better or worse execution wise. But it just seems a little bit too off the rails for me for Ducat.
I certainly would agree. I would, if I had the keys to the car, I would have made some different choices. I think I would have been tempted to at least push it in different ways. But that's another discussion for another day, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think that about does it. We're coming up on an hour. It's always fun to play these what if scenarios. What if we had the reins as far as writing and show running goes for the last season. That feels. I think definitely there's some not divisiveness. Divisiveness is too harsh of a word, but definitely some differences in opinions in some fans, and it's nice to be able to talk out some what if scenarios. We'll be back next week, I believe.
I think so.
Might be
somehow
pre-recorded something, we'll be back next week for another episode of Trek Live. You guys know the drill. The discussion does not have to stop here. Twitter and our Discord server. Discord's awesome. Thank chat as always. You guys are awesome. Having some great
thank you
comments, keeping the discussion going. That being said, thank everybody for watching. We'll see you guys next time.
Take care.